Dan Rubenstein, Rivalry Week now officially in the books. We have much to discuss here on this Tuesday spillover episode as we get people not just up to speed with any leftover thoughts, not just up to speed with the latest for Bowler Top 12, not just up to speed with this whole Ohio State Ryan Day debacle.
Yeah.
But also get people ready for the weekend ahead because we've got 9 championship games. None of those 9 championship games have a point spread greater than 4 points.
Oof.
It is going to be an exciting week of college football action, my friend. Welcome back. Welcome back to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Great to be here. Had a wonderful rivalry week. I guess maybe because the team I love to see won a game they haven't won in a little bit. But otherwise, just wall-to-wall action. BYU ended up beating Houston. That was something that we were talking about a little bit while recording our reaction show. And great to see all of the news breaking with transfers and coaches. It's just not great to see for the guys who, are getting fired or, leaving places that they've, worked really hard to start at or be a star at or make work. But great to have the silly season upon us because nothing makes less sense than December 1st until I guess this year it'll be January, like with the portal, with recruiting, with early signing day and 40 hours from when we're recording this. We'll talk to Brandon Huffman this week, of course, as is, tradition because he's the best of the best from 247. So life is good, Ty. This is a very, this is a heavy time of year for us.
Very, very heavy time of year. Make sure you hit follow. Make sure you hit subscribe wherever it is you get your podcast so that you don't miss any of those episodes. Go on out to verballers.com. Sign up for the free tier. I'm going to make the poll available again after week 15, after championship week, just to get more votes out there, hear from more people. We had a record number of votes again. I'm going to unveil the Verballer Top 12 here momentarily. It is good to have the Verballerhood participating in this. Again, if you are listening to this, we have 1 week left of Run the Board. We're going to have a big prize as you try to go through and pick all of the championship game winners and some of the props that will conjure up in between. If you don't get in time to play Run the Board, we're going to have our big Winter Wonders game, which you and I are still sorting out. The big Winter Wonders bowl pool, playoff pool. We're still, again, figuring out what that calculus looks like. That is going to follow. That, again, will be a fun deal for everybody in the Verballerhood, not just people who are signed up at verballers.com. So make sure you stay tuned to what we're doing by hitting follow, by following along on social media, or just by listening to the show. We'll keep you up to date with those items and much, much more. I'm going to unveil the Verballer Top 12 poll here in a second. We are going to go through news. We are going to talk to our friend Ari Wasserman because Ari wrote an article. First off, Ari spent like a decade covering Ohio State. He's intimately familiar with that program. But on top of it now, in his new capacity with On 3, of course, he's half of Andy and Ari on 3, one of our favorite shows. He wrote a column about where he sees things with respect to Ryan Day and the Ohio State football program. So we're going to allow him to unpack that a little bit from now before we also preview what's going to happen this weekend, just so that you can plan accordingly. Here is your Verballer Top 12 poll.
Okay.
Going into the final week of the season. Number 12, South Carolina, Dan. South Kakalaki sneaking in here ahead of number 13, Alabama, for what it's worth, just by a few points. Not a lot, but the Verballerhood felt like South Carolina should be rewarded for their win over Clemson. Okay. Number 11, Arizona State. Arizona State won Territorial Cup in resounding fashion this past weekend. Number 10, Boise State. Still in the top 12. No reason to drop them out. Number 9, Indiana. Indiana won 66-0. There's a reason they're at 9. Okay, we'll take it. Number 8, SMU. Won in resounding fashion over Cal. Number 7, Tennessee. Pulled away from Vanderbilt. Started off a little bit of rocky, right?
Sure.
Rocky top, I guess we could say in the end. They end up winning that one pretty convincingly. They finish this round of polling at number 7. Number 6 is Ohio State. So penalized for the loss, but not penalized that much. They are still very much alive in this conversation, as I expect they will be in the playoff bracket. By the way, I did put a bracket together based on these polling results, which we can talk through as well. Number 5, Georgia. Number 4, Penn State. Number 3, Notre Dame by a nose over Penn State. The tightest bit of balloting here amid all of these teams is Notre Dame and Penn State, separated by just 22 points in our polling, which really amounts to a couple of votes here and there.
Yeah, there was this and the distance between Ohio State and Tennessee. Those were the close ones.
Number 2, Texas. Number 1, Oregon Ducks. Oregon, far and away the number 1 team, the only undefeated team in this crop. For those of you playing along at home wondering, well, what does the rest of the field look like?
Yeah,
Alabama was at 13. Miami dropped to 14 by virtue of their loss against Syracuse. Ole Miss at 15. Iowa State at 16. And just for good measure, the Clemson Tigers, who will play for the ACC title game
and for a
this
playoff
weekend,
spot. Yeah.
This Saturday night and playoff spot, they are currently at number 17.
Yeah. My thoughts here. Your thoughts here, Ty. I mean, so Notre Dame ahead of Penn State's an interesting one because you yourself mentioned that was a close call, and those are two teams that, I mean, Notre Dame's not going to be a top 4 team, so that's sort of moot in terms of this specific number next to their name.
In terms of seeding, they won't be.
In terms of seeding, right. They're not getting a bye.
They may finish as the number 3 overall team in the college football playoff rankings. We'll have to see how that goes. But
right.
They will not get that first round bye. They will be hosting a first round game. I had most of these teams. The one that I did not have was South Carolina over Alabama. Yeah. And I just took head to head and gave it to Alabama. They won that game. It was close. It was 27-25.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose you could make a case that you like where South Carolina's at. You like where Lenora Sellers is at. You like what you saw from the South Carolina offense. Maybe you like their defense. I mean, there are cases to be made, I guess. I just think the strongest one you can make is that Alabama beat them, which is why I put Alabama at 12. But
yeah, and it wasn't a September 9th game. This was mid-October, if memory serves.
Mid-October.
So it's not who South Carolina is today, but that's also South Carolina had an opportunity to win that game multiple times. And while they did kick the most memorable onside kick of the season.
That's right.
Where your 10,000 RPM onside kick.
Beautiful onside kick.
It's having the opportunity to win and not being able to come through means they should be just behind them.
Exactly right.
Because they were just behind them on the field. And while South Carolina has been thoroughly entertaining and they have been really, really good, just forget about the entertainment factor. Just really good as a football team.
Yeah.
You know, it's the old, like, was it Wayne's World or Wayne's World 2? There's a lot of people's girlfriends in there, right? My girlfriend's in there. There's a lot of people's girlfriends in there. I think it was Chris Farley. Like, there's a lot of really good teams. You know, Lane Kiffin's doing his best on social media to be like, well, actually, if you look at the losses, the record does better. Ole Miss has actually been, they didn't lose, blah, 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 blah. It's a lot of pee in the pants from some SEC fan bases and coaches in this moment to try to be number 12. But I would personally have Alabama, bad loss to Oklahoma and all, ahead of South Carolina because they beat them.
Well, and a lot depends on who ends up winning some of these championship games.
Yeah.
If Clemson were to knock off SMU, even if Iowa State were to knock off Arizona State. Now, we haven't seen the latest batch of polling per the college football playoff, but depending on how this shakes out, if a team outside of the top 12 ends up winning a conference, that could knock number 12 out. Just in the way that the system works. So, yeah, for sure, there's a lot of fretting about being one of those so-called bubble teams. The only other thing that I would add here, since you brought up Notre Dame and Penn State, Notre Dame was ahead of Penn State in our poll last week. That gap has narrowed ever so slightly this week. And maybe it's because Penn State won in the capacity that they did against Maryland. Maybe you saw something from the Notre Dame defense that you didn't feel comfortable with, that you switched the order.
You know what I think it is? I think towards the end of every regular season, when people annually realize that Notre Dame doesn't have to play in a conference championship game, they hold the no conference thing against the Irish to a bigger degree. That
it's possible. It's possible
that Penn State has to play another game, has the opportunity to win the Big Ten, and it's a more challenging experience to be Penn State than Notre Dame in November, December. And
sure.
When Notre Dame did have to play in a conference championship game, they got, it was Clemson COVID year. They got torn limb from limb. And so the Notre Dame advantage of not playing this coming weekend as a top team, I guess maybe in the eyes of some voters, says like, well, screw that, man. Penn State has a tougher road.
Listen, it's all fair. We got, as I said, a record number of votes for this.
Yeah.
Thank you to everybody for participating. If you go to verballers.com and sign up for the free tier, I'll make it available this week. We had a lot of new people sign up. Again, there's really no strings attached. We just want to get more people to vote in this. I think it's fun. And by the looks of it, you do as well. Based on this polling, I drew up, which I will post alongside this for Baller Top 12, what this actually would look like from a bracket standpoint. Okay. This is assuming that the top 12, as we see it here, as we voted it, Arizona State's going to win the Big 12. SMU is going to win the ACC, that type of thing.
Right.
So I'm not accounting for upsets in this. There's no way I could do that. But what I get out of this, I would much rather be a 5 or a 6 seed than a 1 or a 2. And I know a lot's been written about this.
Yeah.
And people are mixed still to this day on the expanded 12-team playoff. You can believe whatever you want. You know where I stand.
Mm-hmm.
But something that I do think is a very real shortcoming of the system, especially in a year like this, is truly being the number 5 seed gives you perhaps a cleaner road into the semifinals, at least, than being the number 1 seed, than being the number 2 seed. It may not be like that every year, but that's absolutely the case this year. Because I'm looking at it from the standpoint of Notre Dame. Notre Dame would have South Carolina at home in round 1, perhaps against Boise State in round 2, with the opportunity to play either Oregon, Ohio State, or Tennessee, which would be on the other side of the bracket. That feels like a pretty clean path in if you're a Notre Dame fan. Also, everything comes up Penn State by that same logic.
Sure.
Penn State would be hosting Arizona State in Beaver Stadium. The winner would play SMU. The winner of that game would get either Texas, Georgia, or Indiana. It is just a much easier pathway through to that semifinal, being a 5 or a 6 in this year's version of the playoff. Will that continue? We can only, take guesses at this point. Will we get to a point down the road when they decide that they're going to expand this again to 14, where there's going to be a reseeding like we see in other pro sports? Perhaps. Maybe that's one way that you could fix this. But at least as it stands right now, that's just an interesting nuance, especially when you're looking at a game like Oregon versus Penn State this weekend. Of course you want to win. Of course you want to get that first round bye. Of course you want to be in all likelihood the number 1 overall seed. But also, in terms of the playoff and the road into the national championship, there's very real benefit to being a 5 or a 6 and not the 1.
I mean, who would know better than angling for an easy schedule than a Notre Dame fan, right?
That's right. That's right.
My question, though, is, or my line of thinking really is like, I don't know if football's tennis that you're angling for the best quarter of the bracket or the best half of the bracket.
I don't think you angle for anything.
No, I'm not saying angle, but I'm not saying you feel good about it, because I think you always want to play fewer games in football. These are programs that are not used to playing 14, 15, 16 games by and large, are not built to do so, don't know the rhythms of doing so. To wait now for some of these teams 3 weeks, for Notre Dame even more, with no game this weekend, I think you kind of always want the bye, because you play that extra game. Those are just extra opportunities for, in your case, Notre Dame or Penn State or whoever. That's just another opportunity for Jeremiah Love to just step wrong. It's another opportunity for Riley Leonard to step wrong or take.
I get it.
I just don't think looking at this in terms of hey, you want Arizona State and Boise State, maybe, but then by the time you make it to the semi or whatever, you are just walking wounded and you just get destroyed by Ohio State or Oregon or something like that, because your lineup is depleted or you're just worn down. Yeah. And you have the time off before, which is nice. You have the couple weeks at least, but I just don't ever think, all things being relatively equal, that no matter what, you're going to be playing a very good team. I'd rather play 3 good teams than 4 to win a trophy or title, whatever.
Per this Verballer Top 12, your first round matchups would be, as I said earlier, Notre Dame hosting South Carolina, 5 versus 12.
Yeah.
Penn State hosting Arizona State, a 6 versus an 11. We would have Georgia hosting Indiana, a 7 versus a 10. And Ohio State hosting Tennessee, an 8-9, with the winner playing Oregon, which far and away would be the toughest corner of this bracket.
Yes.
In my opinion. But again, we will make sure we post this wherever it's relevant. Weigh in, let us know in the comments, send us emails, wherever you can. Curious to get your thoughts on this Verballer Top 12 in the bracket. Who would you pick coming out of this bracket if it did end up looking like this?
Yeah.
As you said at the top, we do have some news that we should probably get into here.
Please.
We have breaking news!
Ooh, boop, boop, boop. What do we
Before
got?
we get to our conversation with Ari, we do have some hirings and firings and transfer type stuff to discuss here. Neil Brown is out at West Virginia. This comes amid a flurry of West Virginia fans writing into us to say, please fire Neil Brown. Please fire Neil Brown. We have seen a wide range of names linked to this job already, ranging from Rich Rodriguez, who was there before, to Andy Kotelnicki, who is currently the offensive coordinator at Penn State, reportedly going to take an interview for the job.
Yeah.
That will be an interesting opening. By the way, Neil Brown, for what it's worth, could take the UMass opening. Remember, they got rid of Don Brown. There was some chatter out there that Neil Brown has ties to UMass. Maybe he's interested in taking that job. So It seems like that could be a thing. Mac Brown out at UNC. This one became official. We knew it was going to happen. We talked about it on the show. But UNC...
Not coaching in the bowl game.
UNC going to be having an interim in the bowl game. It does appear as if this could be one of the top jobs this cycle, provided there aren't any other surprises out there. Ryan Walters out at Purdue. Purdue Eric, who messages us on Patreon, I have to imagine was thrilled at this news.
Mm-hmm.
It has not been a good season for Purdue. It got a lot worse losing the old Oaken bucket by 66 points. You just can't always come back from that, Dan. Ryan Walters cannot.
No.
That is an opening. We did talk briefly on the Saturday night episode about Gus Malzahn. Gus Malzahn not fired at UCF, but resigning to become the new offensive coordinator at Florida State.
Which makes me think that not being fired was more of a choice of words than anything else. They're like, well, I'm going to leave before we get that meeting on the calendar. Yeah.
Pulling a little bit of a Satterfield with that one.
Yeah.
Mike McIntyre, also out in the great state of Florida. He's out at FIU. There will be a new coach next year in Pitbull Stadium.
Yes.
And a hiring to report. Temple has hired Casey Keeler from Sam Houston State. He's a guy who's got big-time roots at Delaware, where he coached for 11 years, was very successful with the Blue Hens. So he's
navigating
coming back.
the FCS to FBS transition pretty well. Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good hire. He's coming back home to the Northeast. And of course, we will talk about the Ryan Day circumstance here momentarily when we have Ari on the show.
Yeah.
We also have some transfer portal news. It is that time of
Got
year.
some names in there. Yep.
Got some names. It's not all the names, but these are some names that the Verballerhood might be interested in knowing about. Miller Moss. Miller Moss, when he was benched for Jade Mayava, there was some rumors out there that, he was looking at Michigan. He was going to enter the portal. Probably not going to Michigan is my assumption at this point, but Miller Moss is in the portal. Bryce Underwood, baby. You're not going to pay him all that money to keep him on the bench.
You need a bridge. I think you need a bridge.
I think it's Bryce Underwood day one, baby.
Oh, I think
day one.
I think Bryce Underwood will eventually be the starter next year at a certain point. I think you want that bridge. I think Miller Moss might, for the next 15 years of his life, be a bridge quarterback occupying. He may become Tyrod Taylor, for all I know. We're just like, Miller Moss won the job, but the first round pick is going to get there in 6 to 8 weeks. I think Michigan's going to go after a bridge.
Miller Moss could go somewhere where he doesn't have to be a bridge, though. I think he had a good enough audition with USC this year that he does not have to do that. Maybe I know he really likes Michigan. I know that was high on his list before he ended up going to USC.
Okay.
But, Miller Moss out there. Anthony Calandria out there.
I mean, he kind of has to be a bridge because I think he only has 1 year left.
Only has 1 year left.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming he wants to start somewhere in his final season. Anthony Calandria leaving UVA. Anthony Calandria, an exciting process. Somebody we've been very excited about. We've enjoyed watching Anthony Calandria out of the state of Florida. It'll be interesting to see if he heads back to the state of Florida.
6'8", right?
6'8". Saw Ricky Collins is in the portal, backup for LSU. There's some talk that Garrett Nussmeier may come back, so Ricky Collins not really rolling the dice. Thomas Castellanos is still in the portal. He's been in the portal now for, a couple weeks. We knew about that one after he got benched in favor of Grayson James up at Boston College. He will be an interesting name to chart. Who else do we have here? Eric Rivers, we jotted down from
Very
FIU.
good receiver, yeah.
Good receiver. Not quite as good as KC Concepcion, my boy from NC State, who is in the portal.
Concepcion from 2023, yeah.
From 2023. Micah Hudson, another big name from Texas Tech. He was a 5-star recruit, came in with much acclaim. It was a huge recruiting win for Texas Tech to get him. Not anymore. Creed Whitmore. There's a name for you, Dan. Someone's going to take him with arms wide open away from Mississippi State, bolstering their own receiving core. And what else do we got here? Julian Humphrey, the cornerback leaving Georgia.
Got kind of benched this year, but started a bunch of games. Yeah.
Started a bunch of games. Jaheim Otis, the defensive lineman from Alabama, is going to be leaving. Jonte Cook, another wide receiver who I should have grouped together.
Yep.
And of course, Matthew Sluka, who's just been hanging around in the portal, man. Hanging around. He's handing out the pamphlets for all the newcomers. He's been there for quite some time. Matthew Sluka is going to get a little bit of love this cycle.
Yeah, he's at the job fair passing out resumes.
And then my pet player from the, I guess, FCS ranks here from the Ivy League, Malachi Hosley. He is the running back from University of Pennsylvania. He is going to be the guy that I'm fixated on from the FCS ranks, just FYI.
Yeah. Well, not just you being fixated on it. If he is actually decent and gets playing time wherever he ends up, every single broadcaster from the Ivy League.
That's right. That's right.
No, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is a ton more names. We've heard names that are not yet officially in the portal. You heard rumors of tampering. It's all going to happen in the next
all happening.
week or two. But yes, it's about to get very chaotic. And again, signing day, portal, playoff, all happening at the same time.
Great. Love it. Great. Yeah. The only big draft declaration that I could find, and it should come as no great surprise, Caleb Johnson, the running back for Iowa, has decided to go pro. Depending on where you look, he's either graded as the number 2 or number 3 running back this cycle. Number 1 is Ashton Ginty. That goes without saying. In some cases, Omarion Hampton, the back from UNC, is graded as 2, but Caleb Johnson is right there. In some order, it is those 3 guys who are sort of leading the pack with respect to NFL draft running back prospects. So again, not a surprise, just something that we wanted to get on the record here, Dan. Anything else jump out to you from a news standpoint before we get to Ari?
I don't think so. I'm just trying to, I've seen a lot of stray thoughts about the playoff, and I actually, there's I think it's BCS Know-How. There is some Twitter account, some social media account that like points out like what the BCS rankings would be if the BCS were still a thing. And I think it's Oregon, Texas, 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And you think to yourself, all right, kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
All things considered, with Ohio State's loss, with Notre Dame's, resume loss or resume killing loss with 1 loss, 11-1, and not playing in a conference championship, with Penn State being in the same conference as Oregon and having that, loss to a team that Oregon beat, you're like, oh, it's kind of clean this year for the BCS.
I hated the BCS.
Yeah.
I hated the BCS with every fiber of my being.
Yeah.
I will say, though,
every
time I look at that Twitter account, or anytime I look at anyone running the formula who's figured out how to incorporate all of these new elements,
sure,
it really has stood the test of time. I mean, it's really damn accurate, all things considered.
It's also, by the way, a year in which a number of these conference championship games, it maybe you'd have to go through every year, and I just haven't, so maybe that's on me. But like, it feels especially worthless this year. You're just like, well, we got to find out who deserves the Big Ten crown, the undefeated team or the 1-loss team. You're like, well, Oregon kind of did it already. You look at the ACC, you look at the Big 12. I think the Big 12 is a legit case where you're like, who deserves it? Both of these teams have lost 2 games in the conference. Then you're like, oh, I guess it's Joey McGuire who beat both of these teams. We should just give the Red Raiders the conference crown.
Just give it to them, baby. Give it to them.
In the SEC, we have Texas and Georgia. Georgia's lost a couple times. Texas hasn't, even though they lost head-to-head. I mean, like, the Premier League way of thinking about this is like, well, we have an SEC champion, guys. Yeah. Texas has the best record at the end of this whole thing, and they scheduled at least what looked to be a good non-conference game. In the ACC, seems SMU has done more to earn this than Clemson, and kind of a formality, but here we are.
I mean, this fell off the back of a truck for Clemson this week. Let's be real.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely.
And I'm not saying I'm not necessarily picking against Clemson.
Oh, but ending up here, yes.
But this fell off the back of a truck.
Losing their way into this.
Absolutely.
The Clemson Tigers. So yeah, there is like that element of like, why are we doing this every year? What is this exercise in, especially when we have this extended playoff? But the television overlords have their way, as always.
The television overlord. I will get to the TV overlords here after our interview with Ari. Because
okay, great.
I'll talk through what these games are just so you can plan accordingly. They're good games, if nothing more.
I mean, Boise UNLV is great, but we saw it.
We did, but and there are some rematches here.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to see these games. They look like they're going to be a ton of fun. I will get to that in a little bit. We did want to bring our friend Ari Wasserman on again from On3, from Andy and Ari on 3, one of our favorite shows. Ari's been a friend of this show for as long as we can remember.
Yeah.
And also he covered Ohio State for a good chunk of his professional career. So he knows this team better than we know this team. He is more opinionated on this team in this situation than you and I could ever possibly be.
Sure.
And so to add a little bit of a spice to this episode, but also to very realistically talk through where Ryan Day is at now with respect to the fan base and this program and just the overall college football conversation, we could think of nobody better than Ari to step in here today and talk it all through with us. Ari, how are you?
I feel honored to get called up into the bullpen, and I just want you guys to know this is a brand new mic today, first day using it, and I built the stand on my own, which is a huge growth for me. All you had to do was screw it together, and I figured I felt pretty good about it. But yeah, I'm happy to be here. This is always a very hot button issue, and I feel like Groundhog's Day because we have to have it every 4 years. But this one, I think, is particularly different. So I'm excited to get into it.
When we called you out of the pen, they were playing Timmy Trumpet and getting the whole crowd worked up for this one because you've informed us before we hit record that you have some fresh takes that might only be available exclusively on the show, which
he's got some knuckle curves ready to roll.
We're very privileged to see the Ari Wasserman Ryan Day slurve on today's episode.
Guarantee they were going to be good takes or interesting ones. So, buyer beware.
13-10 was the final. Michigan won. The immediate aftermath of this game, I think we all did kind of our part to react to it on our show, on your show. Everybody kind of did the same thing. You had a chance to go back and rewatch the game. What was your impression on the rewatch as opposed to seeing the game in the moment? How did you come away feeling, knowing that this sort of used to be your beat? How did you kind of come away feeling after the rewatch?
I talk a lot about Ohio State because I spent a decade of my life covering that team. And I think, being a national podcaster and columnist is hard in terms of like gaining institutional knowledge of places and understanding them to their core the way I do with Ohio State. And it's an important place and a lot of people care about it. So it kind of worked out well for me. And like, I will say this, and full disclosure, guys, I watched the game in College Station with Andy at a Texas Roadhouse. We were sitting at a bar and we were eating those cinnamon butter rolls that they give you. And I was like, I didn't really start really paying attention to the game until the second half. Cause like I was knee deep in cinnamon butter. And by the way, been on this diet journey. I smashed food on Saturday. I was like one of those days of like, it's rivalry Saturday. I'm just going to eat whatever I want and get back on the wagon on Sunday. So I didn't really start to consider that Ohio State would lose the game until the fourth quarter. Like I thought that it was just a rivalry game and they were playing poorly and that Michigan's offense stunk and that Ohio State would throw it to a receiver at some point and then win the game. So once they lost, it was almost like shocking to me. Like more shocking than the previous ones because unlike the previous three, this is the first time Ohio State lost to a bad team. Like Ryan Day, say what you want about his performance in the rivalry, and there's a lot to say about that. He has gone through the first 5 years of his Ohio State leadership without ever losing to a bad team, regardless of their uniform. And I think you could make the case that this is the worst winner of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry game, maybe in the history of the rivalry, like in terms of like how good the team that won was. And I think you could make the case that this is the most shocking upset loss in the history of the rivalry. Certainly go back to 96. And if you are feeling extra advantageous, going back to 1969, which is a game that happened basically 100 years ago that people still talk about. So, and it was done in a way where it was just egregiously coached and just mismanaged. So like that to me is, it's like weird things happen. It's college football. Teams lose to teams they shouldn't. Like Georgia could have lost to Georgia Tech. Stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
But this entire program, its coach, its players, its fans are built on winning this football game.
Right.
And for you to have the worst game plan imaginable, almost as if like you've never even coached football before, going into this game and trying to take a injury-riddled offensive line and run the ball down Michigan's throat when their only real hallmark on their team is an elite defensive line, without trying to use the advantage, not trying to attack Michigan in a way where you have the advantage, I thought was egregious. So, did he choke? Is he John Cooper? Like, all these things are important. But like when you get down to the tactical X's and O's on how Ohio State tried to attack Michigan,
Right.
it almost felt fixed. It was that bad. Like, it's like, how could you possibly do that?
Well, okay.
Somebody commented to us. Sorry, Dan.
Yeah.
Somebody left a comment for us saying that, in their opinion, it seemed like they tried to out Michigan.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting way of putting it. I hadn't thought of that beforehand, but it was almost a confounding game plan. It seemed
It's
to go
almost like-
counter to everything we know that they are good at otherwise.
And it's like my whole column about this game afterward was that Ryan Day is mentally it's like, this is a mental issue, like whatever it is. And I think that is under the umbrella of mental issue, because I think that he probably got so bogged down on trying to prove that Ohio State could be tough and to win a game. He ended up playing 4 quarters on Michigan's terms, which, when you have a team that can barely get a first down half the time, like, how on earth are you doing that? And they had big turnovers and all these things that they could have done. No points off those turnovers in the second half. And then, of course, this defense that has been elite all year gave it up again in the fourth quarter with long sustained drives against a team that, frankly speaking, has a terrible offense. So, there's a lot to unpack there. One is, if you have an Ohio State coach who does everything right but beat Michigan, can that person be Ohio State's coach? Like, I think that's a baseline discussion that you could have had Michigan been 11-1 this year and good.
Right.
And then the other baseline question is, if you are a team that invested $20 million into a roster and a program that invests as much as it does into a recruiting budget, facilities, fan experience, all that stuff into the football team, how is this game plan or what they put on the field on Saturday a acceptable representation of that investment? And those two things are very heavy stuff, which all lead to my opinion, which is Ryan Day probably isn't fit to be Ohio State's coach anymore.
What do you know about the relationship between Ryan Day and Chip Kelly? Just because Chip Kelly is somebody who Ryan Day probably holds into as high esteem as anybody he's worked with, right? That he is like his one-time mentor. He's worked with him before. He's older. They're from the same part of the country. They're from the same state. They're from the same area, right? They have this history together that if there were anybody who could pull Ryan Day aside and say, like, what is this game plan, man? Who are you trying to prove this to? Like, are you still angry about Lou Holtz from last year and calling you soft? Like, who cares? Let's run an offense that can beat Michigan. Michigan State scored 17 or whatever against Michigan.
Yeah.
It's not on the defense, which I don't think you actually think it's on the defense, because
I
think
don't.
it was a 2-yard touchdown drive that Michigan had in this game after the interception. But like, why does, and this is just me guessing here.
Yeah.
Why is Ryan Day not listening to Chip Kelly if we think this is a Ryan Day stubbornness issue?
Well, that's what's so weird about the situation, guys, because Chip Kelly was supposed to be the thing that shielded Ohio State from having the emotional pitfalls that lead to them losing games like this. Like, Chip Kelly was supposed to be the one designing the offense and calling the plays. And from what I understand, that's what happened on Saturday. But it looked like it would have looked if Ryan Day was more bogged down on, those thoughts than calling an offense. So it's like Ohio State has 4 receivers that are going to be first-round picks on their team. And Michigan was without their 2 best players in the game, on top of being bad, including Will Johnson, their NFL corner. And did they throw the ball downfield, like, in the game? Like, was it once? The entire second half, they just didn't possess the ball. And when they did, they just ran it up the middle for no gain. And it was just a bizarre thing. And, like, I've spent a lot of time in my career covering Ohio State, going back and watching Ohio State games and understanding and being familiar with the rivalry. And I was like, when Jim Tressel was the coach, they would go out and have like 5 to 7 new plays offensively a game just for that game that nobody had seen all year.
Right.
And it's like when Ohio State goes out on the field, whether it be against Michigan or anybody else, it's just, we're going to rely on talent and we're going to win. And like, there's no, it almost looks like there was the game plan that we saw on Saturday looked like nobody even prepared for the game. Like, that's like, I would be like, that's what I would see if you just showed up without watching film and are just like, let's play. And like, I don't want to be hyperbolic, and I'm actually working on it.
Right.
And I really do not think I am being hyperbolic. Like, it was the worst game plan I think I have ever seen. I can't even think of anything that would be on, like, in terms of at least Ohio State, anything that would come close to it. And they've had some pretty head scratching losses in the past too. Like, I was at the 15 Michigan State game where Ezekiel Elliott rushed the ball like 9 times and they ended up losing to a backup quarterback at home. Like, that was the worst blunder of Urban Meyer's career. That this was worse. You know, at least Ezekiel Elliott was in the hospital that week and like had some infection in his leg that stopped him from being fully healthy. Like, there's at least an excuse. Like, I don't even know what the answer is here. And like, could Michigan be that deep in Ohio State's brain and DNA to cause this? And if they can, then you can't continue to proceed, because there's no way. Like, if Ohio State was playing that exact team with the same personnel, but they were wearing not Indiana's a terrible example this year, Purdue uniforms, but it was the same player on a different field somewhere else called something different, as Ohio State like a 31-point favorite. Like, I mean, I don't think people are, because Michigan's the defending national champion, are respecting and acknowledging how bad they've been. Like, they're not a good team. So that's the worst team Ohio State's lost to since they lost to Purdue in 2018.
Rondale Moore, yeah.
Yeah.
What is it about this job, Bruce Feldman wrote about this for The Athletic, that has sort of seemingly ground Ryan Day down to a nub emotionally, and talking, doing the interviews ahead of time where he said, this is on par with some like horrible, like personal life trauma. Yeah. Is there any coming back from this? Like, is there any reason to believe? Because there's reason to believe that Ryan Day is an excellent college football coach, big picture, right? 47-1 against non-Michigan Big Ten teams. Something crazy impressive that basically any program would be.
And the One is the number 1 team in the country right now.
Right. Yeah. And the One is on the road by 1 point.
Who
has been number 1 for the past few weeks in the country. Is there a reason that you can believe? And we got the sort of like, hey, Ryan Day is doing yoga now stories in the offseason. I think maybe I'm conflating that with Brian Kelly from whenever, but that it was like, there's a chiller nature to Ryan Day this past offseason. Is there any coming back from this? I know your answer in what you've written is no, but like, do you see a world in which he realizes the error of his, hubris and stubbornness or whatever, and is able to, move forward?
It's been 4 years. Like, you got to fix that after 2. If you're getting paid $10 million to be Ohio State's head coach, you don't get 5 years to figure that out. So I don't know. Like, the thing that's just different now is that in the past, losing to Michigan ended your season, and that's how you went into the offseason. Like, right. Ohio State might be hosting a playoff game in 2 weeks.
Right. It ultimately mattered not that much.
Like, it didn't really, I mean, it mattered in the sense that they won't be Big Ten champions, and it mattered in terms of what matters to people.
Of course.
But it didn't matter in the national championship race. So, like, is there any coming back from this? I mean, I guess, you guys remember what happened in 22 when they lost to Michigan and the world was on fire. They almost beat Georgia. Mm-hmm. And if they would have beaten Georgia, they likely would have won the national title. And I don't know what we would be saying about Ryan Day right now. I don't think I would say he can't be the coach anymore. So, like, they have games to play, and they're the third. I don't know if you guys saw this, but they're the third highest betting favorite in terms of like the shortest odds to win the national title.
Well,
like,
Michigan's not in the playoff.
Good.
That's fine.
Yeah, they don't have to play Michigan again.
Yeah.
So, if they play Tennessee or they play Notre Dame or even Oregon, that's the thing. Like, I guess they're salvaging that. But like, the thing that you guys have to understand about the Ohio State fans is, and this is going to sound psychotic, and I'm not even sure it's true, but I think it might be true, that even if Ohio State won a national championship this year, there would be a level of disgust about what happened on Saturday that you can't wash away even with the title. National championship is more important than beating Michigan. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But I don't know if you can still like exist in a system where you can't beat your rival, win national.
That's not the right way to do it.
Yeah, like, and it's like, what? Like, if you ask an Ohio State fan, like, they'll win 3 national championships under Ryan Day in the next 15 years, but they won't beat Michigan once. Like, do you think they take that deal?
Right.
Like, I don't know. Like, some would. I don't know that everybody would.
So let me ask you this, Ari. Let me kind of spin off that premise. One of the popular schools of thought online right now, if there is any debate over this, and if you believe Bruce Feldman's column, he's saying the only people who want Ryan Day to stick around are Michigan fans, which there probably is some credence to that. Where I'm going with this, though, is if not Ryan Day, then who?
Well, that's,
to Dan's point, the schedule, right? The schedule, you look at what he has done so far in his career. The record has been pretty good. It hasn't been great against Michigan, but all things considered, he has been, yes, an excellent college football coach. If not Ryan Day, who is the fix? Is there a fix out there at Ohio State? Because they've got all the resources you could possibly imagine. Is it simply a change of guard is going to fix this thing, or is it like a head case that extends beyond the head coach?
So how much do they pay for search firms, guys?
I think like 7 figures.
Seven figures. Yeah, I don't make 7 figures. I don't know. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like, it's like there are 2 schools of thought on this, guys. One is Ohio State is Ohio State. It has all the money in the world. It has advantageous recruiting advantages. Anybody can go get really good players to play there. You need a coach that gets it. And then on the other hand, it's like Ryan Day does 95% of the job better than everybody else outside of Dan Lanning and Kirby Smart in college football. You fire him because he's 0-4 against Michigan in the last few years. They don't recruit as well, and like they turn into Tennessee or something. Like, and Ohio State has never had prolonged down periods. They've always seemed to figure it out. But like when Jim Tressel got fired, Urban Meyer fell out of the sky. Like that was like almost like divine intervention for them. Like, it's like,
right.
So I think that coaching changes are the one thing outside of NCAA sanctions, which are going to be fewer and far between in the future, that can derail a program. So like, definitively what Ohio State is under his leadership, which is an 11-win team who will make the playoff literally every year in this new system. They will never not make it. If they start losing, because he has no track record for losing teams that aren't very good until Saturday. That was his first time they lost to a bad team.
Yeah.
So do you take the thing that you know, or do you say what we know is unacceptable because of the Michigan game and take a shot at something? And it's like, I don't think Mike Vrabel is ever going to coach at Ohio State. Like, that's the number one name that you hear all the time.
Right.
And then he was just on some show somewhere talking about how he couldn't stand how he had to go open up the stadium when recruits would come to visit, even though he knew they weren't coming there. Like, that's not the temperament of a human being that wants is on PMT. Yeah. So like, I saw that clip and I was just like, yeah, that person does not want to coach college football, and he's going to be an NFL head coach soon. So it's like, do you go back to Luke Fickell? Like, Wisconsin's kind of on fire right now. Like, do you want to do that? Like, or do you? And like, the thing too is, it's very complicated at Ohio State because being an Ohio native matters to a lot of people. And the 2 coaches who have been terrible against Michigan, but otherwise good at their job in every other facet, were John Cooper and now Ryan Day, and neither of them were from Ohio. So like, if your candidate has to be from Ohio, then like that whittles your pool down. But then who is it? So it's like a very complicated thing. Now, the thing that I will say, guys, is that if you watched the post-game news conference of that man, and like, here's the thing. I like him a lot. He is a good dude, very good person, and comes from a great family. And like, everything about him is a good like leader for a program. He looked like he wanted to cease to exist in this job and like walk out of there. Like, he wasn't looking reporters in the eye. Like, he is a broken man at the moment. So like, when you ask, is there coming back from that? Well, we'll see on the field in 2 weeks if Ohio State can muster up some pride and play well and make a run here. But like,
well, it's also like, who wants that hell, right? The right person at Ohio State will have a great job and will, seemingly have a great life, but then it comes under constant stress, but
full circle, because it isn't like beating that Michigan used to be easy.
Sure.
Like, and it should have been easy. That's the reason why everybody's freaking out. Like, you lose to the Michigan team that won the national championship last year. It's like, that sucks, but you understand it. You lost to a good team. It's a rivalry. Stuff happens.
Oh, I'm not even saying the Michigan part of it. I'm saying who wants what is now on the shoulders of a major head college football coach in 2025 of recruiting and portal and NIL and the 12-team playoff and an expanded conference that now you have to play Oregon and USC and whoever else. And on top of all the mission, like, who is actually, I'm gonna say, like, very, like, maybe there are 3.5 people on earth who could actually successfully navigate the Ohio State job. And other than beating Michigan, Ryan Day has been excellent, which is not good enough, of course, but like, it's just in the way that, like, the head coach of Alabama, the head coach of Georgia, the head coach of Texas, these are all like hellish experiences in terms of what a guy has to do.
And is that the reason why when the Alabama job opened, they hired somebody in 38 hours that had never coached at that level, you know, like, or at a place like that?
Right.
And like, is that why we're going to find out that Alabama hired a nice guy like Ryan Day, who isn't a psychopath and a,
you mean Kalen DeBoer?
Yeah, right. Like, are we going to be talking about that in 5 years? Like, do you have to be a certain type of machine to exist at those places and be successful long term? Because Ryan Day, you could go to Chili's with and have a nice lunch with and talk about tennis and Wilson shirts and dieting and all that. Like, you could not do that with Urban Meyer, right? Like, Urban Meyer was so programmed at one thing, and like him or not, you know, personal opinions of the guy aside, he was a machine. So like that, and how many people exist like that right now when coaches and I think part of the reason why there aren't that many coaching positions opened at all in the sport is because there aren't candidates flying around like there used to be.
Right.
Like, and nobody is who they are until they get their shot. Like Glenn Schumann, for instance, the assistant at Georgia, could be the next Kirby Smart when and if he gets his shot soon. But like, there's no big time proven coaches. You saw it with the A&M search last year. You saw it with the Alabama search. Like, there's no, well, who do you get? Well, you pay a search firm. You have an athletic director who's making 7 figures. Use their understanding of what needs to be done in the sport to guide that decision. Like, who am I to say who it should be? I don't know. Like, somebody who isn't scared to game plan a functional plan against your rival. Like, start there.
Ari, Ohio State's new AD is Ross Bjork, who has a bit of a history
Little one,
paying enormous buyouts before or after re-upping Jimbo Fisher down
not
at
his
Texas
money,
A&M.
to be clear.
Not his money, but there's a bit of a track record there. One of the, I guess, more scandalous thoughts that I have seen floating around online is that, hey, Ohio State should just bring back Urban Meyer.
No, don't do that.
Where do you think the Ohio State fan base is on that idea?
I think I'm going to get clipped on this one. So I covered every game and every day of the Urban Meyer era. And I will say that I think that there are 2 schools of thought on that. One is that I believe that he's very underappreciated. I think Ohio State is what they are today because of the groundwork that he laid to bring them into the new era. Like, I don't know if Jim Tressel would have just stayed an extra 10 years, if Ohio State would have made that recruiting turn and turned into a juggernaut the way that they had in terms of like talent accumulation, money spent, expectations, all those things. On the other hand, he's a very problematic human who has had some issues. So like, and I don't think that his way of doing things, not that I even think he would be interested.
Right, of course. This is hypothetical. I'm just sort of parroting what I saw online.
Let's do Rich Rod to West Virginia next.
Right.
I don't know if his leadership style can work in the NIL era because he ruled by fear, by I don't need to know your name until you do something. Who are you?
Right.
If you're not going to do good enough, get the hell out of here. Like that sort of thing. And it's like in the portal NIL era, like he ruled by fear and expectation. And I think that is, great because it works. But it demands a lot of things out of people, but I don't know if you can do it when people can just hop in the portal whenever they want now. So like, I think people would be mad and I think some would be excited. I think it would be a disaster if it ever actually happened.
What do they do from here? What, in your estimation, knowing how this place operates, is it on Ryan Day to figure out if he wants to be in Columbus. There was a story after that there's not really an appetite to spend, upwards of $40 million buying him out at this point, especially because they're like a playoff team. Like this wasn't a catastrophic season in its totality, unless you believe it's all Michigan, which, I mean, that's true for a lot of people.
It is, though, because of the investment and what they did to, like, losing 2 games
of
with
course.
This roster is insane. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
So who does the future of Ohio State fall on in this moment?
Yeah. So, I mean, that would have to be Ross Bjork, right? But I do think that he's already made a statement to the Columbus Dispatch that they are 100% behind Ryan Day. So, like, in terms of, like, firing him, I don't think that's going to happen.
Is there a universe in which he's like, God, I had so many great years here. This is always going to be a special place to me. On to USC.
I think there is. Yeah. Or on to the offensive coordinator job for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or something.
Right.
Like, I don't know if that's going to happen, but like the man that we saw in the press conference after the game on Saturday did not look like a man who wanted to be the coach there anymore. But at the same time too, like when he got hired, guys, the Cleveland Plain Dealer sent me to New Hampshire to spend time with his family and to like get to know him as a human and write a big profile on him. And like his brother toured me around New Hampshire and like the places I used to play. And, I went to his high school. I looked through the yearbook. Like I feel like I got a sense and an essence of who Ryan Day is as a person. And like, that is a competitive dude, like he is like driven by winning. And I don't think you could become the Ohio State coach if you weren't driven by that.
No.
But like, it's already as bad as it possibly can get. Like if they lost to Ohio State or to Michigan next year at Ohio State, like, is it worse than it feels right now for them? Probably not. It just is what it is at that point.
Right.
Like for me, I would take the free roll if they'd have me back and try to not go out like that. Like as a person who is competitive, quitting is the worst thing you can do, right? Like, because then your legacy is cemented as that. Like if Ohio State would have beaten Michigan this year and won the national title in a hypothetical world, all would have been forgiven. I still think that if he could figure out a way to fix it, that all could still be forgiven. Like if they win a national title this year or beat Michigan next year and win a national title next year, which is always possible at Ohio State, like you can forgive that, but you have to be willing to try to fix it. Now, the issue for me and the reason why I don't think he should be the coach anymore is that I think we have enough evidence that he's not in a position to do that. Because if he could, it would have been done already. Like if he fixed the issue, they would not have lost on Saturday.
This would have been the year where
this would have been like that. And that's a layup. I mean, you could play that game 100 times. If they come in with the right game plan, they probably win 98 of them. Right. Like, I have no idea how, like, if you simulated that in an alternate universe, how that could happen again. Like it was that bad. I'm not trying to be, again, hyperbolic. It was that bad. So, could he get this team back? Could he get this fan base back? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I believe that he has the ability to do that anymore? Absolutely not.
So you're saying potentially beat Michigan 55-10 next year and poetically, once again, go out like it was Marcus Hall with the double birds after he was kicked out of the game like a decade ago for Ohio State.
Like if I were him, wouldn't that be so much better, like to live with yourself? Because like think about how much money he's made at Ohio State and how much of his life he's put on the line for that program. To go out and just be the footnote of the guy who couldn't beat Michigan for the rest of your life would be a pretty terrible thing for a competitive person. So like, part of me thinks he's going to like tap out and go find another job somewhere so that he can like be in a sane place where he doesn't have to worry about whether people are going to pick on his kids, at school, or whether he needs a police escort to get home. Like that's insane. And if you act like that, you're a psychopath. But that's Ohio State. Like people that's how it is. So like he might not want to live in that world anymore, but you're also making a lot of assumptions. Like, what he said during the week about like what happened with his father and how this ranked up there with one of the worst things I don't think he's saying it was as bad as that, but I think what he's saying is that he takes a tremendous amount of pride in his work. And like, for me, it's like, if I got busted for plagiarism or something, or like I said something on air that got me fired, that would be one of the worst things that ever happened to me. And it doesn't mean that it's more important than family or things that could go wrong in your personal life, but like your profession when you're a coach is your personal life. It is your life.
Right.
So like, I think that he feels that way and looked the way that he did on Saturday because it is like literally outside of a terrible thing with his family, the worst thing that could possibly happen to him. And it keeps happening every year. I just don't know. It's so complicated because it's like everyone's like, fire everybody. But it's like, it's so much more complicated than that.
So why didn't the big money feel that way after the game? Why aren't they as impassioned as
I think that they probably are. But we're also like 6 months away from revenue sharing and all these important, expensive things that are happening. And it's like, is it a smart use of money to fire a coach who's going to be owed $40 million?
Yeah, I don't think so. But I'm just, weeks away. This is not a smart sport.
Yeah. When you're 2 weeks away from playing in the playoff,
right?
And like, we won't be like. Could you imagine if they won the national title now? Like, it's on the table if they figure it out. It's always on the table for them. This would be much different. I don't think they will. I think they're broken, but I think the story is still being written.
Okay.
Right now, as I sit here right now, I don't think he'll be the coach there next year.
Wow.
All right. Based on just leaving for greener pastures, deciding himself to do so.
I don't think he's going to be fired.
Okay.
I don't think he'll be fired. But I do think that he might find another job somewhere.
That's a $40 million decision.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's like they could win 3 more games and like your perspective changes. It's really hard to try to write the ending to a story that hasn't been completely unfolded yet. And then on the other hand, when I say that, it's like I also know kind of how he is, and I don't know that he would want to quit. So it's complicated.
It's complicated. Not complicated. Andy and Ari on 3. 2 generally awesome dudes. And why say generally? I mean, all the time. Listen to their show. Read Ari on 3. And as always, thanks for coming on.
All right, Dan, there you go. Ari Wasserman, some fresh hot takes for the Verballerhood.
Yes.
Talking through Ryan Day and Ohio State, and man, what a mess.
That would be
mess.
Is there precedent for the head coach of a place as big as Ohio State voluntarily leaving for not an upgrade in job esteem or quality for like an offensive coordinator job in the NFL?
I mean, Urban Meyer left Florida because of health reasons, right? I mean,
yeah, he took time off.
He took some time off, so I guess that would probably be the closest comp that comes to mind. But what we're talking about here is essentially mental burnout.
Yes.
What we're talking about here is like borderline yips. I don't know if we've got a comp for that. I mean, it does feel somewhat unprecedented, as is hiring anybody to take over at Ohio State. We just kind of went through this exercise with Alabama. It's really hard to hire somebody at a program that big. I am not equating Ryan Day to Nick Saban, but I think it's a tough gig to try and just plug somebody into and expect success, given all the resources they have, given some of the baggage they now have over the last 4 years of losing to Michigan. It's been a while since they won a national championship. That is always the expectation at Ohio State. It's a complicated mess, as I think Ari pointed out.
Yeah.
A good mess in that you have everything you could possibly imagine to make the program successful, but with that comes great responsibility. And I just don't know where Ryan Day is at right now.
It's always back to Spider-Man, Ty. It's always back to
Spider-Man. Somebody called me Tommy Maguire on our YouTube comments recently. So
because of how you look or because of your Spider-Man love?
I guess because of how I look.
Oh, okay.
Or because of the Spider-Man love. I don't know. I'm not crawling the ceiling here. I don't always get it.
Worse things to be called. Yeah.
Here is what we are looking at this weekend, if we are to take a look ahead. There are 3 games on Friday night. The big one is UNLV against Boise State. Boise State is favored by 3.5 points at time of recording. At the same time, though, is Tulane against Army. Tulane -4 against Army. I am going to hammer the crap. I almost said a different word out of Tulane minus the 4. Okay. Just throwing that out there. Tulane early lock of the week.
Wow.
Also, Friday at 7 p.m., CBS Sports Network, we've got Western Kentucky against Jacksonville State for the Conference USA crown. State favored by 3.5 points. Then as we turn the corner into Saturday, there are 6 games of note. Saturday, high noon on ABC, we've got Iowa State against Arizona State. Arizona State favored by about a field goal. I play that one in Arlington. Saturday at 4 o'clock, it's Georgia, it's Texas. It's a rematch. Texas is favored in this one, despite the earlier matchup earlier in the year.
Yes.
Then 2 games, doubleheader at 8 p.m. Clemson, squaring off against SMU. SMU favored by 2.5 points for the ACC game. And then the big one, the sort of solid Bowl. My Penn State Nittany Lions, your Oregon Ducks favored by, as we said earlier, just 3.5 points. 8 p.m. on Fox, Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. We will not be at this game. Did we want to do something else for this game? Because it feels like a regal occasion.
Yeah, we're going to Macau. We're going to put on tuxedos and watch this game while playing Baccarat.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, we can do a live stream. SmeltizeHair.com.
SmeltizeHair.com. We'll figure some way to make it fun.
What level of passion, what level of verve, what level of Tom Platziness do you have for Penn State playing Oregon instead of Notre Dame playing Oregon? Is it a 70% as juiced? 58, 91?
Oh, it's about 87, I'd say.
87%. Okay.
I'm ready to bring the funk on you a little bit on Thursday when we start talking through these games. I'm ready.
What do you identify more as, right? Because you don't have Notre Dame friends in the way that you have Penn State friends, right?
No, I
like
don't.
you paid tuition at Penn State.
I wasn't smart enough to get into Notre Dame. I got waitlisted, so I have a chip on my shoulder with respect to that. And
Let's
I
be
know
clear, I didn't even think to apply to a place like Notre Dame. I knew I wouldn't get in. Yeah.
So I didn't get in there. I still kind of hold that against them. And I could have entered the transfer portal. I chose to stick it out with Penn State. So
sure.
I am a Nittany Lion.
Okay.
I'm a Nittany Lion. I'm going to be ready for this game. I'm fired up for this game. I will have some libations on hand for this game. We're going to have it a true second screen fan experience.
Okay. I can't wait. Okay. I like to gauge because there's more like family ties with Notre Dame and more friend and social ties with Penn State.
I'm gonna go through my Rolodex and see what Penn Staters I can get on the stream with us. I got some ideas. Yeah,
Anthony Morelli. Like, what are we talking about here?
Anthony Morelli's not going to come on the stream, but I can work something out. Okay.
Oh man, who are the Penn Staters that you think could provide like ample counterpoint juice?
I'll let you know. Okay, just kind of put that one in the quiver.
Okay.
Got a few other games on Saturday though. The MAC Championship, the Battle of Ohio. Literally, it is Ohio.
They finally get to play.
Ohio at 9-3, Miami of Ohio at 8-4. Miami, Ohio, your Miami, Ohio. They are a 2.5 point favorite. And then at 7:30, it's Marshall against Louisiana for the Sun Belt. Louisiana favored by 4 points.
A weird games. Charles Huff situation, right? At Marshall.
Weird Charles Huff situation. Rumors that maybe he might take the Southern Miss job.
And that he's hasn't had his contract extended. He's
on
an expiring contract.
Yeah. There's a lot of weirdness there.
Yeah.
So
they got a bunch of great games. Some of them feel unnecessary, but I can't wait to watch them.
I'm excited to watch them, Dan. That is what you have in store. Again, if you want to pick those games and some of the props, go to playruntheboard.com. We'll be activating that game shortly. If nothing more, go on out to our Patreon at verballers.com. Sign up for the free tier. Sunday morning at 8 a.m., you are going to get a email and you can vote in our poll. That will be in direct conflict with the upcoming playoff rankings from the playoff committee. I'm just curious to compare the two. The Verballerhood is smart. We've had many people chime in on pretty much every social media platform saying the Verballerhood should pick. I'm all for it. So let's see how the Verballerhood fares versus the actual playoff committee. More to come on how we're going to cover all of this because there's a lot going on next weekend. So stay tuned to the Thursday episode, but make sure you hit follow or subscribe so that you don't miss any of our stuff.
Couldn't agree more, Ty.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildenbrand, thank you for downloading, for listening, for supporting. We will talk to you all on Thursday. In the meantime, as always, stay solid.
Peace.